Nerds, plant nerds. I'm Grant. I'm a bird nerd, also a plant nerd. I am a horticulturist. I did have a little nursery. I've worked in lots of nurseries. I would like to today talk about a problem that was raised in one of the comments in the Facebook bird emergency page discussion, and it was about waratahs and about a problem that happens with many of the Proteaceae species, and waratah is in the Protea family, Proteaceae, which is the same family that houses grevilleas and banksias and dryandras and floidias and, of course, leucodendrons, leucospermums and true proteas. And often banksias will, beg your pardon, plants in the Proteaceae family, Australian plants anyway, can often drop dead rather quickly. And there can be many reasons for that. But I want to talk specifically about waratahs. And waratahs are in the genus Tilapia. And the most common, the most well-known is the New South Wales waratah, which is Tilapia speciosissima. But there are some other similar banks, tilapia, and the most common, or the most similar to the New South Wales waratah is the New England waratah, which is Tilapia aspera, has also big terminal red flower. Let's have a look. I'll bring, just to give you an idea. The Tilapia flowers are terminal, and in the case of Tilapia speciosissima, which is in that picture, they are quite large. Now, there are many improved cultivars, and we're looking at the Australian National Botanic Gardens website pictures here. To give you an idea, there is a white one, which is the Wirrambirra white, which is very common in cultivation. There it is there. It's a stunning plant. But there are some smaller species. Now, this is the Victorian waratah, Tilapia oreades, and that is pretty common. You'll see it growing in the roadsides if you're driving in the forest country in far east Gippsland. There is also a Tasmanian waratah. Again, smaller flowers, but again, terminal and red. It's quite striking. I haven't had any experience growing the Tasmanian waratah. But you'll see that many of the cultivars, there's one called Sunburst. We've had a look at the Wirrambirra white. This one is very common in cultivation. Braidwood brilliant. These are all selected cultivars. So it's just selected forms that have been growing and noticed by plant aficionados in different locations. Now, it's quite easy to see why the waratah is a favourite of gardeners. But because it's in the Proteaceae family, a lot of people assume that they can grow it in the same way that they would grow other common plants in there from that family, like many of the grevilleas and maybe some of the hakeas, because it's quite a similar looking plant to some of the big shrubs in the grevillea or hakea genera. But waratahs are a forest plant, so they like rich free draining soil. So generally grow in quite slopey country. Like they don't grow normally on flat ground that's going to be regularly waterlogged. So Waratahs like deep, quite rich soil, lots of compost, leaf litter around them, but they need to be free draining. So what have I done to employ good growing techniques with Waratahs? And I see people are jumping in, so that's great. Let me know in the comments if you have experience with Waratahs. Have you had bad experience? And I'm also interested if you have other plants in the garden that you have found to be problems, that no matter what you do, if there's something that you've been really trying to grow that you haven't been able to be successful. And we'll see if we can tackle some of those problems. But I'm going to give you a couple of hints about the Waratah, and in particular the New South Wales Waratah, because that is the one that you are likely to find in a nursery. If you were to pop out and look for one today, that is what you would likely find, and you may find one of the cultivars like Braidwood Brilliant or Wirrambirra White, or you may just find the species Tilapia speciosissima. I've had success with Waratahs by by building a mound for them to grow on. They like quite a deep root system, so even though they do grow in quite rocky country sometimes, they still like to be able to have at least about a metre of clear root space where they can get their roots down about a metre. Now, one of the things that I think is important is that they do like what we call a cool root run, in that they will they like a even temperature for their root zone, not like many of the desert plants and some of the plants that will grow in soils that can be frequently waterlogged or flooded, where they can tolerate higher temperature, lower temperature, higher temperature, lower temperature. So if you want to give your Waratah the best chance of success, I suggest that you plant on a mound and that you heavily mulch with rich leaf litter. And if you want to maintain an aesthetic with a different kind of mulch, do that over some leaf litter or composted material. And that will need to be topped up frequently. So if you're not in a situation in your garden where you are replicating that leaf fall and heavy leaf litter and the activity of all the invertebrates that are in leaf litter, you'll need to be, I would suggest, annually and perhaps biannually, depending on how heavily you are applying the leaf litter and mulching. And the other thing that Waratahs need in hot summers, they need to be watered. They need to be watered when it is hot and when it is dry. Part of maintaining that cool root run is maintaining the water level or the percentage of water in that root zone. Best way to do that is to use something like soaker hoses or drippers, because that way you do get the deep penetration, and that heavy mulching will assist you in that, especially if you have your plants planted on a mound. Now, it doesn't need to be a very high mound, but 20-30 centimetres is what I used to employ to get good results out of them. Things with Waratahs too is they may take a little while to establish, but then when they do get established, they will grow very quickly. You will see large spurts of growth in the growing season, and they're gross feeders, so they will take a lot of nutrition out of the soil, which is why they want that composting. But also being proteas, they do not want too much fertilising from general garden fertilisers. You must use a native fertiliser, so it's low in phosphorus. All the Proteaceae in Australia are susceptible to being over-fertilised if you use a general grade garden fertiliser. Because our soils in Australia are, well, the cliche is they're ancient. It's a very old continent. They're ancient soils. They are very efficient at pulling nutrients in. And in fertilisers, a lot of the nutrients are really, really quickly, readily available. And they can basically lead to a toxicity, a poisoning. What have we got? Glenn has... Good morning, Glenn. Hope you're out in the garden. I hope it's not too hot today in the city, Western Sydney. Apparently, you're going to have a heat wave out there today. So Glenn has said in the past he's lucky to get one season out of them. They've died back to a single stem stick. When I pulled them out, there was no roots at all. This is a garden. I've got them in a raised bed border by large sandstone boulders. The soil was clay-based with native garden mix, 20% river sand, cow manure mixed in. There's a large bottle brush trees overhanging, so the leaves add mulch. We get 40-degree temps here. Got a bird bath nearby, so splash from the bird bath help keep them cool. And I assume you've got another one coming. What I would suggest there, Glenn, is that even though they are getting splashed from the bird bath, on hot days, most of that is not going to get into the root zone. A lot of it will be absorbed by the mulch and then evaporated off quickly. So if you've got large sandstone boulders, try this. This is how I would do it. I'd also be interested to know what size they were when you bought them. My tactic might be, if you've failed, if you've got a spot that you want to put them in, this would be my tactic. Preparation would be, this would be my tactic. I would buy one as young as I can buy it. Like if I can get tube stock, that's what I would do. If I get a 6-inch or 140 mil pot, that's what I would do. I would then pot it into a larger pot. Once the roots have got to the edges of your 6-inch pot, I would then pot it into a larger pot, maybe a 10-inch or a 12-inch. So what are we looking at? 400 mil pot. And I would pot it into a mixture that is essentially the same soil that is going into your garden, that is in your garden. So I would essentially excavate the hole that you intend to put it in. I'd plant it into a bigger pot, and that I would then nurture it through that period. And when it is growing vigorously in that pot, and the roots are at the extremes of that pot, I would then transplant it into the garden. But I would use the same tactic. I would raise it slightly from above. I'd backfill. I would heavily mulch with leaf litter. And to maintain that cool root run that I have talked about, I'd do two things. If you have some rocks, maybe some especially shallow sort of platform rocks, I would put some of those in the base of the of the hole, maybe upend them. And I would also use those as part of the surface area mulch. And that helps maintain a stable temperature in that root zone. I would water them with a ring of drippers or a drip line around it. If possible, I would put it on a separate line so that you are able to regulate for your waratahs a little bit more water than most of the rest of the garden on those in those hot periods, because they're forest trees or they're forest bushes, they're forest shrubs. You'll often they like full sun for part of the day, but they don't like being in full sun all of the day. So I would try and give them full sun in the mornings, part sun in the heat of the day, and certainly not full sun in a hot summer's day. Now, there's always exemptions to any of those rules, but that when I think of the positions that I've had them in, they've always had a bit of protection from afternoon sun and also from hot winds. They do not like hot winds that will dry them out. So there we go. But the other thing that I think once you get them established, they can hang on. They can hang on quite well through difficult times. But the hard bit is getting them established, and they are quite a long-lived shrub. So let's see. Glenn's told me about past failures were elsewhere. These are doing well. Okay, so they were tube stock and 2 are from seed stock. Good. I like when people can collect and use seed stock, because you get that genetic diversity which allows for adaptation. So good going. They're now 60 centimetres high and looking good. I water them in the hot summer twice a day. When you fill up the bird baths, they're doing good. Okay, they get full sun morning to midday. After that, shade from the bottle brushes. That is exactly what I would expect them to do. Now, waratahs develop a lignotuber when they are mature. So, until your waratah has developed a lignotuber, and a lignotuber is that woody base that you see at the bottom of many Australian plants, mallee eucalypts generally have lignotubers. Many of the Banksias will have a lignotuber. So you'll see this big woody base at the where all the stems radiate out of, and it gets warty and barky and can look a bit ugly, and will usually protrude up above the soil level, so it will look like this big bump. When your plant is developing the lignotuber, it is becoming mature, and that is when you can think about a bit more aggressive pruning. But in general, for waratahs, most people grow waratahs because they want the flowers. Some people want them inside as cut flowers. Some people want them out in the garden for all of the honey eaters and insects to come and drink the nectar. They can be very, very good producers of nectar. You can often see nectar running down the stems at the base of the flowers, where the nectar is just in overdrive. Nectar production is in overdrive. The general rule, and I've been looking at many of the experts talking about pruning waratahs. Most people say prune the flowering stem length back to about half the length if you want to take the flowers inside. I would tend to agree with that. Prune to an outward-facing bud, as is good practice generally, so that the plants grow out, continue to grow out, rather than grow back in on themselves. So that I rarely did that kind of pruning because I didn't want the flowers for inside. I wanted the flowers for the birds, and I would let them run through to seed. But then I would cut them back quite aggressively. But I personally didn't take all of the flowering stems back at once. I tended to prune a mature waratah 2 or 3 times over a growing season. So as the flowers were dying off, the first flush, I would then cut them back to about halfway. Because I had it growing in a display bed in a nursery, I probably cut them a bit further down than halfway, more down to about waist height, groin height, so that when they threw the flowering canes the next year, they were up at sort of head height, so they make the biggest impact in the garden. So you can be fairly aggressive, but I never pruned all of the plant at once. I would always prune them progressively over a growing season. I once had to maintain a garden where there was a very old waratah. I was told it was about 45 years old. And every second year, that plant was cut back. 50% of the plant was cut all the way back to the lignotuber. So I guess what I'm saying is the most common wisdom for pruning waratahs is prune the flowering canes back, or the flowering stems back, about 50% as the flower. If you want the flowers for inside, do it just as they're fully opening. They're a long-lasting cut flower. If you want them there for the birds, wait until the nectar production has finished. If you want, cut them back then. If you want them to go to seed and you want to collect the seed, leave them on. But to promote the flowers for next year, you'll still need to cut some of the flowering stems back, because that pruning is what promotes the production of more stems for the next year. If you don't want to cut them back hard, just do a tip prune. Cut the spent flowering heads off, and they will throw another bunch of stems that will then have flowers at the extremity. But bearing in mind that they do grow long flowering stems, so then you put the flowers up higher. So in most cases, if you have selected the waratah for ornamental reasons in your garden, you are going to want to bring it back, to waist height or thereabouts. So that is the bulk of what I wanted to say. The pruning for all of the specific waratahs, whether you're getting the Victorian waratah, the Gippsland waratah, the Tasmanian waratah, the Monga waratah, Tilapia mongaensis, and they're all rewarding plants, but they have smaller flowers than the New South Wales waratah. But they all serve the same function in the garden, they all have fairly similar cultural requirements. They can be gross feeders, so that's why they love that leaf litter. They love that mulch, but they do not like to be wet because most of them grow in hilly or even mountainous situations. They are generally found in gullies, in a wet forest or a generally in a sclerophyll. They're a sclerophyll forest plant. In Victoria, they're a wet sclerophyll forest plant. In New South Wales, I think they're in that dry to slat to wet sclerophyll. You have a different. You don't have as many wet forests as in Victoria and Tasmania. But they need to be protected from the worst of the hot afternoon sun. They need a cool root run. They have a fairly deep root system compared to many of the other Proteaceae. So if you can give them a metre of clear root space below them, they will use it and they will get themselves well anchored, and they will extract everything they can out of that soil. Mound them if you are not in a well. I would mound them anyway. That way, it makes it easier to build up. You can easily apply a thick layer of mulch right around them every year, and if you need to have an aesthetic decorative mulch on top, do that on top. My suggestion would be to water them with a drip method and keep their in the summer, keep their root zone well watered. How much water that is, that depends entirely on the soil you have. They prefer a free draining soil, so they generally don't want to go straight into a clay base. You want to put them into a sandy loam if you can, but if you have clay, you can dig through a large amount of organic material into that and you may get satisfactory results. I had them in a very sandy soil, but that sandy soil, when I kept it, it was a grey/black sand, but had a high over time had a large covering of organic matter, so a large leaf litter layer on top, and that had been worked through into the sand by the invertebrates. So they were very, very happy in that, but I did drip water them over the summer, and I did use some flat rocks as a way to do two things. One, to reflect some of the sunlight so that the soil below the rock would not get too hot, would not warm up too much in that top 5 to 10 centimetres. And in winter, it would also absorb warmth and retain it during the depths of winter. That was another way to attempt to keep the root zone fairly constant. Well, within a stable band, temperature band. What I did notice is that Waratahs and Banks and Baronias did quite well in the same sort of conditions. So if you want to grow East Coast Baronias, think about growing them near where you have your Waratahs if your Waratahs are doing well. So that's really what I wanted to say about Waratahs. But happy to take any other questions or any other thoughts. Um, I I guess I'll talk generally for a minute about the Proteaceae generally, if you're growing Australian Proteaceae. Um, when you are getting to know your plants, because if you do watch them closely, you'll see how they respond. Uh, actually, Glenn, this is a good. This is what I was going to talk about today, and then I thought, no, Betty had mentioned her Waratahs in Goulburn, so I thought we might talk about Waratahs first. Actually, I might also talk a little bit about what may be a problem in a place like Goulburn to start with. But Glenn's noticed that he's also got the pig face ground cover. So common name is the noonflower here in eastern Australia. Pig face ground cover starting to cover that bed as well to keep it cool. Now, I was going to talk about ground covers today because ground covers are fantastic at doing a couple of things. One is absorbing the energy from the sun. If you are planting into a full sun position and you want to keep your plant's roots cool, plant a ground cover that will be vigorous, that will absorb that sunlight energy. Canedias, pigface is a great one. Pigface have big fleshy leaves, so they retain a lot of moisture, and they also have they reflect a lot of sunlight. So that's a good thing to do to keep the root zone below cool. Many of the Grevillea ground covers are excellent at doing this. What is it? Grevillea perinda. What is it? A mental block. I can't remember it for the moment. But Laurifolia, Grevillea tridentifida or bitonata, you will see it listed in the eucalypts, in the nursery catalogues. Gaudy Chordy is another one. I mean, there's 50 or 100 of them. Banksia serrata, Green Cape variety. There's a number of prostrate Banksias that will do a similar job. Also, tufting plants, native grasses, native lilies, even the small shrubs, the small Hybertias, Dampieras, they do the same thing. They can stop the sun penetrating to the ground, shading the ground, keeping that root zone cool. Bearing in mind that because Waratahs are gross feeders, they don't want other plant roots in their root zone. So one of the really large spreading ground covers, like perhaps the Myoporum parvifolium or the Grevillea laurifolia, might be an excellent choice, where you can plant them 4 or 5 metres away from the Waratah, but over time they will be spreading right around that. And as Glenn made the point, they retain a lot of that organic material below their own foliage. And they also, you can prune your ground covers and just leave the prunings there, lift the growing shoots over the material that you have pruned, and that then becomes your new mulch. Some of those really rampant Grevillea and Myoporum ground covers are excellent mulches. Just prune them back, maybe a third, and leave the stems that you've cut off in place, and they become the next becomes the next batch of organic material that you can add to the soil. Another good strategy, if you do have those rampant ground covers like Canedias and some of the Grevilleas, some of the Banksias as a ground cover, put your lawn clippings and when you're emptying out your worm farm or your compost bin, just spread it out under the shoots of your vigorous ground cover. That will allow the insects and the invertebrates and the worms to get to work with some protection from the hot sun in that uppermost layer of your soil biome, your microbiome that operates in that top level of soil. So thanks, Glenn. I think utilising ground covers as a mulch is a superior strategy, and it's a bit like, I can't even remember, did we talk last week about why your lawn is a desert? You can have usable surfaces and open space without it needing to be a lawn. It can be a carpet of ground cover and ground flowering Grevilleas or Canedias, they're the two that I've got in my mind at the moment. The Myoporums as well. Certainly there are plants to do that job. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the Proteaceae, and one of the main problems that occurs with them. That people will often say, "Oh, it was doing well, and then it just dropped dead." Now, if you've got a big shrub or a tree, and it appears to suddenly drop dead, it generally doesn't just, you do something today and it drops dead tomorrow. Depending on the size of the plant, the nutrient store, the water that's within the plant, what you did 6, 7, 8 months ago might be what killed it. But two things kill Proteaceae plants very quickly, and one is applications of pesticides and other chemicals that will get into their root zone or in touch with their foliage. Spray drift from weed killers is a big one. They can knock off very, very quickly if you do that. And certain chemicals in their root zones can knock them off really quickly. So remember that wherever you apply chemicals, this might be for, things like controlling ants, or it can be when you are doing spraying weeds in your paths and things like that. Remember that those chemicals are water soluble and they follow the water course. So often what your neighbours are doing, if they're uphill from you, can run down across your neighbour's property and into yours and cause a problem. So that is one issue that sometimes affects Proteaceae plants, and why they often will seem to get affected where other native plants or other plants around them don't, is because the Proteaceae have these specialist roots that are so efficient at taking compounds from the ancient impoverished Australian soils that they may reach a level of toxicity that other plants don't, because their root systems don't work in the same way. So just bear in mind that sometimes the obvious is not the thing that has led to your plant's failure. It's a really good reason why you should always control the runoff from your block, and you should really hope that your neighbour's runoff is not coming straight onto your property in times where you get heavy downfalls of rain. And that is becoming more and more common. We are seeing more runoff from properties because of the intensity of rainfall in concentrated periods of time that 10 or 15 years we may not have seen. So, but the main thing I want to make sure you understand with Proteaceae plants, Australian Proteaceae plants, is always fertilise, if you are going to fertilise with a commercial fertiliser, that you use a slow release, so prills if possible, and it must be the native branded fertiliser, the low phosphorus fertiliser. You can use the things like Charlie Carp and those kind of fertilisers, and indeed I often did as a foliar feed, but I always did it at half strength, even less, and because over-fertilising Proteaceae plants is probably the number one killer of them. Poor pruning can be another one. Some of the Proteaceae are particularly susceptible to borers, some of the native borers, and incorrect pruning can lead to that. But I think we'll do another session on pruning. I'll do one when I can be out and perhaps demonstrate some pruning techniques. I would say always try and prune back to an outward facing bud or a node. Do not prune stems back halfway. Don't prune back to a distance unless you are pruning back to a bud or to the end of the stem. Because if you don't prune back to a bud, all of that space in between buds that you have cut is essentially useless now for the plant, and it withdraws the nutrient. It goes back to the next point in its physiology where it can send out a new shoot. That is a bud generally, and all of that dead wood becomes an entry point for disease. It also becomes a place where wasps and other leaf or wood-boring insects can enter the plant, where the eggs can be laid, or where larvae that have come in from elsewhere can get into the plant. So, if you're not sure how to prune, if you would like an episode or a masterclass on pruning, let me know and we will do that. There are some general rules for pruning that you can follow that won't leave you with a half-dead plant. Some pruning is terrible, and while you might have the need to prune a plant back to a certain size, always, if that is your number one priority, try and make the second priority the health of the plant, the ongoing health of the plant. Pruning to straight lines along a fence line is generally not a great idea. That is why we have plants that are adapted to that kind of pruning, and we call them hedging plants. A hedging plant doesn't mind that kind of treatment, but it needs to be done regularly to keep it in good health. You can't do it every 4 years and expect that a plant that is cut back like that will do well, because sometimes if you prune back onto mature wood, nothing regrows. Anyway, that's a different story, a different issue. They're they're the real they're the two main issues I see with proteaceae plants leading to their failure, their sudden failure. That is applications of chemicals, no matter what they are, overfeeding with the wrong food, and incorrect pruning. Then you'll have the one-off situations like where maybe you've dug a new drain, or you put in a retaining wall, or you've put in a new driveway, you've extended your driveway. Now, some of the compounds that people use in as base for landscaping projects are highly alkaline. That doesn't mix well with your plants. So sometimes you have a delayed effect from runoff from materials that you might be using in a landscape project that will lead to the failure of your plants. Waratahs require a slightly acidic soil to thrive. So that means a pH level of below 7. In the range of 6 to 5.5 will generally be acceptable. So when you're looking for reasons that your plants have failed, sometimes look just beyond the obvious. Things like renovating your driveway or installing new paths and retaining walls can be the reasons for plants that seem to be quite a way away, but may in fact be getting the runoff from a project that you have done maybe 12 months before. But the toxicity may only build up over, 12-month period, so maybe longer. So just be mindful of that. Alkaline soils can spell death for many plants that are requiring acidic soils. With that in mind, many of the Proteaceae are adapted to alkaline soils. Many of the interior arid, semi-arid plants in Australia are adapted to an alkaline soil because that is what they grow in the wild. Now that's a big topic, and we really would need to talk about examples, I think, to go too much more into that. But there we go. Any other questions or comments this morning? I think that's about all I've really got to say today. Now we're talking on the 14th of December, so that means in 14 days' time it will be just after Christmas, won't it? So that means in 7 days' time, that will be just before Christmas. So yes, I will be here. I will be here before Christmas, and we can, I don't know, I might talk about ground covers. I don't think I'm going to try and cram Christmas into habitat gardening, unless people would like to talk about Christmas. In an Australian context, I can't think of any plants that say Christmas to me. I know there's lots of plants that are used as sort of, holly is the obvious one, but holly's a European plant. It doesn't say Christmas to me. I guess the New South Wales Christmas bush does have its red tinted foliage, new foliage appearing at around Christmas time. Also, the flame tree, the brachychiton. Now there are some in a park nearby to me in Melbourne, Wurundjeri country. They are starting to flower now, so the flame trees for some parts of Australia might give you that feeling that Christmas is almost here. Yeah, maybe give me your suggestions for plants that give you that feeling of Christmas. I'm just thinking about what's nearby for me. Most of the callistemons have come to an end in around here, but there are some eremophilas that are just coming into flower, and the Eucalyptus leucoxylon and Eucalyptus melliodora around me are now flowering, so they're always a Christmas reminder. But we might talk a little bit about that next week if you are wanting to share your thoughts. Has anyone else got a Christmas? No, not Christmas. That's for next week. Has anyone else got a problematic native plant that they have tried to get established in their garden and it just hasn't worked? So Glenn, here we go. Glenn is of course from Western Sydney, where the Christmas bush is a Eastern New South Wales plant, native plant. Christmas bush is colouring up nicely. Flame trees are just about finishing. Okay, they're probably a little bit ahead in Sydney, and they are of course native to the Illawarra region. Now here the flame trees are just starting in Melbourne, or in my area of Melbourne, but the other brachychitons with the white flowers, the bottle and the bottle tree brachychitons, they've finished. They're about a month earlier than the flame trees. Flowering gums are just starting to flower now. Now that is going to be, Glenn, I believe, will be the Ficifolia, the Corymbia Ficifolia, this red flowering or scarlet flowering gum. Now the ones around me are not even fully in bud yet, so I think we'll see those in January and February. But yes, in some parts of the country, they will be coming into bloom right now. I do remember that one of my uncles had a large red flowering gum or scarlet flowering gum in their front yard, and it usually was flowering when we went there for Christmas. So that is one that I do remember. But I think now the flowering periods may be moving around. I do have one of the cutting grown, the grafted flowering gums in a garden just around the corner from my place, and it's not in heavy bud yet either, so it's still a little while away. Glenn notes that the scarlet and the crimson are flowering now. Now, of course, the scarlet and the crimson are the same species, but they are selected forms of that species. And of course, there is a white flowering variety of the red or crimson or scarlet flowering gum too. Not grown as commonly because it isn't seen as that desirable, but the bees love it just as much. The honey eaters love it just as much. So Another one of the reasons why growing from seed can be rewarding, because you never know exactly what is going to get thrown up. Glenn, how hot is it up there already? Because I was seeing on the news that you are about to have a heat wave. Are you home or are you in the gardens today? Let's see. And it's all Facebook today. That's unusual. I hope, Betty, I hope you're here. This show is for you today. Sorry. Oh, that's right. I was going to make a mention about what I thought might cause Waratahs to drop dead in Goulburn. And my first thought is that they might just be getting too cold. I have noted, let me stop sharing that for a minute. I was looking at so Glenn's in the garden today and Monday, and it's warming up. 27 degrees at 10:30 in the west of Sydney. So you're probably going to get about another 10 degrees, I'd reckon. The most commonly reported problems that I found when I was looking through all the different sites talking about how to grow Waratahs, a lot of them obviously are people just regurgitating what they have read before. I'm just looking now and seeing how people are mentioning it. There is a pest called the Waratah beetle, and that attacks the buds. Generally, if you see any misformed buds that look like they're being attacked by the larva of a beetle, I would I'd be pruning those out and disposing of them in the compost. I'm not seeing anything that I would say is reliable about frost. I am seeing that Phytophthora is can be a problem in some areas, but it generally looks like a heavy soil is no, I'm not going to repeat some of this stuff that I am that just looks like rubbish. So what I am going to suggest that may lead to a fairly rapid failure of Waratahs is because they like a free draining soil. The first thing that I would suggest is that they're just getting too wet. So if they're in a flat spot in a garden or a place that is regularly inundated, I think you're setting yourself up for failure. The other thing that may be a problem for them, because being a forest plant, They generally get protection from any kind of frost. And one thing that I would suggest, and this is really Betty, if you're going to watch this later on or if you're here now, think about if they could possibly have been attacked by frost, because the new growth certainly is susceptible to frost. But whether they were protected overhead or not from frost, I don't know. The other thing too is if you get frost for a extended period, and the plant and your soil temperature is getting very low, that could also be causing your plants to die. But often they will show you that they are dead. If a really cold root zone is the reason that they are dying, they won't die the day after they had a frost. So it won't look like the damage that you get from frost damage on the extremities of the plant. It will take a month or so to die. So probably when your frosts have finished. So yes, that could be a reason. And here we are, Glenn's advertising Weekend Birder podcast. So yeah, Kirsty Costa. Talk to Glenn. So there we go. That's good. So you can find that. I think I actually made a link. I think I did do the birdemergency.com/weekendbirder. I think I did that because I was on it once. So I think if you follow that, you'll find it. Otherwise, Weekend Birder is out there in all the pod feeds. So do go and have a listen to Glenn, because he knows what he's doing when it comes to gardens and gardening. Of course, if you haven't listened to the Photography Friday episode, was it Photography Friday we did, Glenn? It was, wasn't it? Anyway, Glenn, we talked about Glenn's garden in back in the archives in the Bird Emergency. That must have been a year or so back now, I would say, Glenn. It was before I went away with Holly, wasn't it? With Millie, wasn't it? So, yeah, that's a while ago. All right, last call for. Does anybody have another question or a comment? Do you have a problem plant? I was going to talk about kangaroo paws, but that would be a whole other hour. What I would generally say with kangaroo paws now, because the big problem with kangaroo paws used to be that you would get the black ink disease in the. Here we go. Hello, Jen B. Lomandra hystrix, which is not thriving, and a Lomandra matrush, which is thriving, planted in the same bed. Okay, let me have a look at the Lomandra hystrix, because I know it exists, but I've never grown one. I think I bought them from like Osbreed or something like that. So let me have a look. Okay, let me just have a look. I'm just saying, Jen, if there are any common problems reported. Okay, so you have Lomandra. So the Lomandra matrush, that's the Lomandra longifolia. Is that the other one you have growing, or have you got Tasmanica? And where are you, Jen? Too. Where are you located? That's the other part of the puzzle. Because if you're in Melbourne or similar, if you are in a cooler climate spot, I may have the answer for you just based on where the two species are from. So, Jen, we'll just hang on a little bit and see if you can tell us. I need you to tell me where you are. Okay. So you're in Bendigo, right? Now, Jen, are you in one of the parts of Bendigo that does get the real winter chill? Do you get the very cold winter, or is the position that you have the Lomandra hystrix in, is it a protected spot, or are they both out in the subject to the elements? For instance, do they both get a frost? Would be my first question. Do they both get the chill? Because Lomandra longifolia is, of course, a Victorian native plant. You've probably got an improved variety, but it will handle wet feet, it will handle the dry summers, it will handle the full sun. But I do want you to just let me know what kind of situation you have them in. They're in the same bed. Are they basically out in the open, is what I would like to know. We'll just wait a bit. And it's nice to see you too, Jen. Where are you? I'm glad you found your way into the Habitat Gardening live stream. Now I'm just going to look for any more cultural information on the just out in front of the veranda. Frosts are rare but possible. Okay. I'm going to take a punt, Jen, because Jen has just let us know that out in front of the veranda, frosts are rare but possible. One other question too, Jen. Is it a full sun position for a large part of the day? So does it get the hot summer suns? Not all day, but hot arvo sun. Okay. There's a basic difference between the Lomandra longifolia and the Lomandra hystrix. Even though the hystrix is one of the most popular landscape plants in Australia, but its popularity is driven by being grown in Sydney and Brisbane and climes like that. It's a warm temperate, subtropical, adapted plant, whereas Lomandra longifolia and Tasmanica are southern climate, temperate, cold temperate, adapted plants. My thought is that if they're in the same bed and one is thriving and one isn't, and they're basically all the aspects are the same, your cultural techniques are all the same, I would just be saying that it's just too cold. In general, it's too cold. And perhaps if it's getting the hot arvo sun, it's also too cold in winter, but too aggressively hot in summer. Because even tropical plants generally don't get the 40 degrees that you might get in an afternoon in Bendigo in late January or February. But it's also not going to get a -2 degree frost. So my thought would be for your Lomandra hystrix, I would dig it out of the bed, depending on how large it is. I'd divide it up. You can divide just with a big knife. If it's so big, divide it into 2 or 3. If it's so big, you'll get more out. If it's still the size of a 6-inch pot, just leave it. But I would pot it up into a larger pot, 8-inch, 10-inch, and I would try and find a spot in the garden where it will get protected. So some overhead shade. They like shade. I was just looking up some of the cultural notes from some of the different gardening experts saying that it handles heavy shade. So that tells me it needs a protected spot. So if you do have a big tree with a big canopy where quite a bit of light gets through, but it doesn't get the really hot afternoon sun, and it also is protected from frost, use it as a pot plant, an outdoor pot plant. If the other side of your house is more protected, maybe use it as a patio plant or on a veranda or under your eaves or something like that. But just give it a bit more protection, protect it from the hottest part of the sun and from the possibility of getting a frost. If you put it into a fairly thick ceramic pot, that can help keep that root. It's that root zone, keeping that root zone temperature fairly stable. If you've got a shade area, if you've got a shade cloth area that you have orchids or something in, or that would be an ideal spot for it. But because you haven't had much success from it, if it's big enough, I would divide it, put it into a couple of pots, and then try out in a few different places. And again, you need to... here we go. Jen asks, what about potting mix? I missed that. All right. Native potting mix always for most native plants. Shouldn't be that much of an issue for the Lomandras. They can be quite gross feeders, and I'm not aware that they have a toxicity issue, a sensitivity to phosphorus, but I would just play it safe. Either that or buy the really cheap potting mix and then improve it with some Osmocote or Nutricote native fertilizer in that. That's generally what I used to do if I was planting any kind of grasses. Lomandra, not strictly a grass, but is a lily, in the lily family, I believe. So that would be my thought there, Jen. Move them, try them out in some different spots, but they do need a bit of protection from the hot sun. Just think about the most mild spot that you might have in your garden. Perhaps as a patio plant, veranda on the deck, that kind of position might be rewarding. And guess what you can do to fill the spot that you are taking the hystrix out of? Of course, you already thought about it. Why don't I divide the Lomandra longifolia and put half of it in the space where the citrix was? Bear in mind too, if you're going to put something in that spot, turn the spot over. Yeah, that would be good. And Jen says she thought they were grasses. Yeah, functionally, that's what they do. They perform as grasses. Let me just see if I can. So, the Mandraceae is its own family, but I think, yeah. Well, they're probably as much a grass as a lily is a grass. They're monocotyledons, so they're basically in that same offshoot of plants going back in the plant family tree. So yeah, they're kind of a grass, but they're not a grass. They're not a true grass. Grasses are in the Gramineae family, and Lomandras are in the Lomandraceae family, and lilies are in the Liliaceae family. Anyway, they're all monocotyledons. So there we are. There's a plant biology lesson that you didn't know you needed today. Got any other questions, Jen, while you're here? Do you have a plant that reminds you of Christmas, Jen? That was the other thing we were going to consider for next week. I might just throw in something too. Jen asked about potting mixes. Okay. I've got two thoughts on potting mixes. Now, Jen, you're going to explain this more for me. I put them in for the birds. They never go there. They go to the succulents. Now, let's talk about that. When you say the birds, are you talking about nectar-feeding birds? And when you talk about succulents, are you talking about plants like the aloes that throw up a flowering spike with the tubular flowers and honeyeaters going there? Or are other birds browsing around the succulents? Because succulents is very, very broad. You could be talking about a jade plant, or you could be talking about kalanchoes, or you could be talking about cactus. So you'll need, or euphorbias. They're all succulents. Now, wattle makes Jen think of summer. Now, that's an interesting one, isn't it? Wattles are generally a late winter, spring kind of plant for me. But I do know that in the bush, in the bush that I grew up in, walking around on the Mornington Peninsula, yeah, we did have wattles flowering in summer, and especially little spiky wattles. And well, we got I think we call it a hedge wattle. Yeah, so that's good. So I'm guessing that can you load a photo? No, it's not easy to do, Jen. You could email me a photo to grant at thebirdemergency.com, and then I could bring it in. We can maybe do that if you get to it quickly. We can do that. Or if you if you've already got a photo on like your Instagram or Facebook or something like that, I can easily share a page like that. You can do either of those, and we can, because I can easily share like a web page. That's easy. Otherwise, you can email me a photo and I can upload it, and we can talk about that. I might add, just talking about the difference that we talked about with soil types and plants. Talking about how the Waratahs prefer an acid soil. I've just seen in some of the cultural notes from one of the growers or one of the suppliers of one of the Lomandra hystrix cultivars that they require a slightly alkaline soil. neutral or alkaline soil. So you would not be planting Lomandra hystrix underneath the Tilapia speciosissima because they require different soil types. Which might be another good reason why your Lomandra hystrix would be best off in a pot. I'm just going to look up. I'm just going to do this on the fly and see if the Lomandra longifolia here we go. This is why sometimes, Jen, the obvious is not always the right answer. Now, I think that everything I've already told you is correct, but I can also tell you that the Lomandra longifolia prefers a neutral or slightly acidic soil, whereas the Lomandra hystrix prefers a neutral or slightly alkaline soil. So I am guessing that you have a slightly acid garden soil in your garden bed, and that is suiting the Lomandra longifolia right down to the ground. Apart from it being, they will handle full sun for part of the day, and they can also handle the cooler temperatures. I think if you can, now let me see. Just bear with me for just a second. I'm going to see if there is a easy product. All right. Now, Jen, Jen's got some other interesting stuff there. Jen, I'm assuming that you haven't done a soil pH test or anything like that in the past, but I'm going to give you another hint for your Lomandra hystrix. When you pot it up into a pot, and when you buy your potting mix, it should have an indication on it. If it's one of the premium blends, it should let you know that it's acidic or alkaline, or if it's neutral. But in most cases, I think a potting mix is going to be neutral to slightly acidic. So, just to make your Lomandra hystrix happy in whatever soil you pot them into, whichever potting mix, get yourself a small packet of garden lime or dolomite lime, and if you are putting it into maybe an 8-inch pot, roundabout 8-inch or 200 ml pot, just sprinkle half a teaspoon of lime or dolomite lime over the surface of the pot and water it in. And don't overdo it. Like, don't be tempted to go back in a week and do that again. Just wait. Maybe twice a year you would do that depending on how often you're watering, but being a lomandra, it doesn't need a lot of water. It just, the hystrix doesn't want to dry out. You don't want to let it get bone dry. I think that will make your lomandra hystrix much happier. One of the reasons for plants struggling in the wrong soil, often they will survive, but they just won't thrive, because when the pH balance in the soil is wrong, they're not able to take up nutrients the way they would if they were in a soil of the right pH. There's a lot of chemistry involved in that, but basically they just can't pull the nutrients out the way they would if the pH was right. So what have we got? Jen said, I've got lots of birds in a melaleuca shrub. Give us some idea of what the melaleuca is. Is it flowering at the moment? If it's flowering at the moment and it has purple flowers or mauve flowers, I would think it might be a melaleuca nesophila. Also flowering at the moment are the paperbarks, like the snow in summer, the Lineara folia. Around here also the Melaleuca hypericifolia, which is a weeping rounded shaped shrub with red flowers. They're in flower around here at the moment in Melbourne. So it's always good to know which Melaleuca we're talking about. You got a succulent with purple leaves. So the purple pom-poms. So yeah, I'm going to guess that is Melaleuca nesophila. Does it have rounded leaves? A bit like the beech tea tree, and is it quite an open, spreading, large shrub? That is, I'm going to guess, is Melaleuca nesophila. Now, I didn't talk about Melaleuca nesophila when I did the Melaleuca and Banksia and eucalypt show the other week, but Melaleuca nesophila is flowering around here at the moment. Extremely good plant in sandy soils and also in poor quality soils, but also can handle occasionally wet soils. Had been used, from the time I was a kid, was really popular as a establishment kind of plant to put in as a windbreak. Really good in coastal situations as well as lightly shaded situations. A terrific plant, but tending to be a bit large now in many gardens. But yeah, reliable. Leaves like a surfboard. Yeah, that's the one I would say that is going to be a Melaleuca nesophila. Not round, but rounded. Yeah, cool. Great. Okay, well we might have fixed a problem today. I hope we've given. I don't know if Betty's here today, but Betty, this show was really based on your query in the on the Facebook page that you were talking about Waratahs. Stick around just a little bit longer if anyone's got another question. Showy Melaleuca. The showy Melaleuca. Let me see if I always try to add a scientific name as well if we can. Let me go back. Let me go back. Jen, does that look like it? I've got it up on the screen now. Just see if my guess was right. or if it was a different one. Oh yes, and when I put in showy Melaleuca, it comes up as the same plant. So there we go. There we are. Jen's giving me clapping hands. So yeah, I think I got the right one. Okay, there we go. Well, that was good. It's nice to prove yourself to be not an idiot once in a while. So that's good. Yeah, you will find Melaleuca nasophila in the nurseries regularly. If you can handle a 3 to maybe 5 metre spreading open shrub, very, very reliable here in the climes of Melbourne, and as Jen has just indicated, in Bendigo as well. I've seen them growing well in Sydney. They are a semi-arid and woodland shrub in nature, and it's well worth getting. If you're tempted to get a Waratah, I would suggest you give it a try, and just think about the position you give it. Likes to be protected from the really hot sun, prefers a period of part shade, maybe full sun in the early to midday period, and then some protection in the afternoon, and a cool root run, a deep uninterrupted root zone if possible, up to a metre and a half if you possibly can. Plant on a mound and heavily mulch. They would be my first tips for growing a Waratah. And Jen has said the birds love the Melaleuca nasophila. Yes, highly reliable, very popular, easy to grow. I'll just see if anyone is going to tell me that it needs no. I'll just make sure I'm not about to tell you porky pies, but I think it's I think it quite likes a maybe the variable. It thrives in a neutral, slightly acid or slightly alkaline soil. So yes, Melaleuca nasophila. There we are. There's a good recommendation. But be aware that it can become a large shrub when it's growing. I've seen them as wide as about 6 metres if they're given the space. But being a Melaleuca, it does respond well to vigorous pruning, regular tip pruning. You can generally take them back, I would say about a third each time you prune. But because they're quite long flowering, prune progressively over the season. All right. So what do I want to remind you? Do check out the latest edition of Weekend Birder podcast, which features Glenn Smith, regular contributor and friend of the show. Thanks always, Glenn, for your input. I hope it's not too hot today in the western suburbs of Sydney. Also, those of you, I think it's going to be hot in Brisbane and Canberra as well too. So remember your friends in the garden, your little animal friends would love some water and some shade. If it does get extremely hot, birds love it if you put a sprinkler on if it gets very, very hot. But don't put the sprinkler out in the full sun. Move it to a part shade position so the birds can cool down and stay cool. Keep your bird baths topped up today, and yeah, make sure if you've got a watering system, make sure. Well, I hope you already ran it this morning to charge up with water your garden beds, and that you wait until after the heat of the day has gone and run it again this evening. Days like today, where it may approach the high 30s and 40s in parts of Australia, are when you really do see the benefit of mulching in your garden. Your mulching strategy, you can get onto that. You can get onto that straight away. You can use so many materials as mulch that will keep your plants looking good. So make that your thing to do in your holiday period. If you're going to be in the garden, attend to your mulch. Okay, everyone. Jen, Glenn, thank you for your questions and inputs today. Be really keen to know, Jen, if we solve your Lomandra hystrix problem with that little bit of adjustment. Slightly alkaline soil, dolomite lime or lime. Move it from where it is, protect it, put it into a part shade and protected spot, and hopefully you'll be able to let me know. It's responded, it's got new shoots, it's rocking along. Everything's great. We've got a Lomandra longifolia that you've divided and put in the front bed, and it's filling it up and it's going crazy and flowering and it's throwing up seed heads. Great. Bearing in mind too that the Lomandras generally don't attract many birds on their own, but their seed heads will be, when they are seeding, they will attract rosellas more than most of the other. I mean, they're too bulky for the finches and things like that. So, if you want some more tufty, grassy plants to mix in with your Lomandras, here we go. I just have a landscaping design inspiration. Look for some Dianellas. Look for some Danthonia, the wallaby grass, and also the Themata, the kangaroo grass. They're good tufty things to mix in with your Lomandra. And we're talking about Tasmanica. Get a Dianella Tasmanica. And then you'll get the flowers, beetles and butterflies and moths like the Dianella flowers. They have a berry that some of the birds like. Again, the rosellas like them. Also, when they fall on the ground, some of the pigeons like them. I've seen, well, around here I don't really have any native finches, but I have seen sparrows attacking Dianella fruits. What have we got here? The Maria. Is that right? Maria? Is that what you're telling me? Jen wants me to put up the... all right, I'll put in in the comments here. Dianella Tasmanica I would put that in. What else did I say? The Danthonia, which is wallaby grass. And then the Themida. Here we go. I think I spelt wallaby wrong there. Now, when I went to horticulture school, it was called Themida triandra, but I think now it might be called Themida australis, which is the kangaroo grass. And of course, what else we put in there? The other things, any of the kangaroo paws. So you might also get and I'm guessing you've put more you've put more Morea. I'm just wondering if you meant Morea. I'll just check. Oh, hang on. You're not talking about the Cape Tulip, are you? Um, let me just check. Jen, were you talking about? Are you talking about this plant? Um, Jen, are you talking about that plant, which is the more Moriso. Oh, so okay, good. You're not talking about that plant. So I was going to say that one very bad. Uh, when I look up Moriso, all I'm finding is some moss. It's not a name I know, Jen. Not a plant name. So Moriso, Moriso. Uh, Not a plant name. Yeah, I was going to say I don't know that one. I did find a moth. Yeah. Um, uh, that plant that I put up was the common name is a Cape tulip or Cape lily. It's potentially a uh, potentially an invasive species here. Like so many of the plants that were planted to be like look like grass, but then have a nice flower, like uh, crocosmia. There's a whole suite of them. You want to steer away from them. We have better options, native plants that you can use. Um, Really, native grasses. There are many that will suit any of your situations. what I like to do is have someone describe to me the situation that the plant is going to go into, and then maybe give a range of options that I think will suit that situation. And knowing that you're in Bendigo, I mean, Danthonia and Themata occur locally up there. Also, Bulbine bulbosa is another little liliaceae plant. Let me put this in. Now, Bulbine bulbosa is a little plant in the lily family, has a little yellow flower. If you're also looking for that you can get the little trigger orchid. There we are, Stylidium graminifolium. I think that's the right spelling. Stylidium graminifolium has white flowers, but up on a raised stalk, and they have this little trigger effect when the insects go and pollinate them. They get hit by this little the pistil comes down on them. Now they're smaller and dainty, but they can fill places. Of course, don't forget as a ground cover your native violet, the Viola heteracea. There we are. I've given you a bundle there. Great. That's a good shopping list. If you have a good native nursery in Bendigo, and I must admit, I'm not. It's many years since I've been into the plant nurseries in Bendigo. There was a good Plants Plus nursery in Bendigo that I remember. I used to, when I worked as a rep, I used to go to it. So, but I think for many of these, I mean, for the Viola heteracea, you should find in most nurseries, even Bunnings used to stock that. But for the Stylidium and the Bulbine and what else did we say? Themata triandra, Danthonia. I mean, most native nurseries nowadays have a good selection of grassy, tufty kind of plants. And also things like Dampiras and Hybertias are always worth looking for. And we've got so many of those egg and bacon pea flower native plants, Devesia. There's so many out there. Oh, cool. Okay, well, if your sister-in-law is a native plant nut, I'm sure she will. She'll have some suggestions. Yeah, I haven't done a run around recently of native plant nurseries in the region. Next year, one of the features I want to do in this segment is to be interviewing specialist nurseries, native plant nurseries from around the country. So, yeah, we'll hopefully be having a sort of lineup of people in January, February, March. We'll see if we can make that a regular thing. Okay, this time I'm really going. Implement all the little hints I gave you about keeping birds and animals cool in this hot day. Jen asks, what part of Melbourne am I in? Jen, I'm just down the train line from you. I'm in St Albans, which is on the Bendigo line. So I'm in the northwest, where we have some remnant native grassland left just nearby. Otherwise, part of that 70s and 80s expansion of Melbourne, where we have very little native stuff left and lots of gardens based around olive trees and fruit trees. But of course, everything's being turned into townhouses now, so we don't get a lot of the regular small garden birds here. Just to fill you in, little wattle birds inhabit a couple of gardens around the corner from me, but mostly what we have here is red wattlebird, New Holland honeyeater, white-plumed honeyeater, noisy miners, blackbirds, common blackbird or European blackbird, Indian miner or the common miner. I mentioned the noisy miner, tree sparrow, house sparrow. Well, Jen says my garden would be an oasis for them. Jen, you're obviously new to the show. I live in a unit with hardly any garden, but I have a project for this year, which is to turn the driveway that we don't use because there's no car in this household into a oasis for those birds to come in, and where we provide feed for each month of the year. The regular visitors to my garden are spotted doves, introduced invasive species, tree sparrow, introduced invasive species, house sparrow, introduced invasive species. I am trying to encourage the magpies use the bird bath. Spotted doves use the bird bath. Occasionally, the crested pigeons come in and use the bird bath. Occasionally, the red wattlebirds use the bird bath. But mostly, everything around here is invasive. So, yeah, I'm trying to spread the word and encourage. I'm growing plants. Jen, you might be interested in this. I have I'm currently growing for tube stock, so I can supply to people tube stock. Plants that I know will do well around here and that will provide value for for birds and animals and mammals over the 12 months of the year. And if you want to support the channel, me, to do all this, pay the bills, keep the streaming service that I use as well as the internet and everything. If people take up an annual membership, when these plants become big enough to send out, we'll dispatch a dozen plants. And the idea was that we would do a dozen. I think I might make it 2 dozen for people who take up that option over the December-January period. I might make it up to Australia Day, and then we can debate the merits of Australia Day, and we can talk about Australian plants and Australian flags and stay positive. We'll talk about Australian birds and Australian animals and Australian plants. But anyway, Jen, so I'm assuming you're a newcomer. You can become a member or a supporter by going to thebirdemergency.com/coffee or go to buymeacoffee.com, The Bird Emergency. Either way, you'll find it. And the membership tier for an annual membership will get you a dozen plants that I am currently propagating from seed and cutting. We've talked about the kinds of plants a number of times, and I'll continue going back to them because they're reliable in the temperate and warm temperate areas of Australia. And look, depending if it's popular, we'll might do a subtropical or an arid group as well. And some of the best grevilleas are subtropical, and Jen just asked, is it all on all on my page. I will put the link in for the Buy Me a Coffee page where I have the little article. Jen, I'm not really maintaining any particular page at the moment because people are coming from everywhere. Like you're in from Facebook, and I I do most of my things on. Let's pop that in. I do most of my stuff on YouTube, really. But let me just get this link in here and find the membership level. I'll get the right link, and I'll put it in the. Just bear with me. I'll pop this in. This is where there we are. I think it shouldn't say studio. It should just say here we go. This is probably the better link. I think that was my link there. There we are. I think my so we have a bird nerd level, and we have a habitat gardening plant selection level, and the the Desolation Dodo t-shirt. Yeah, I don't think I've got that up. There we go. All right, folks. Been here for ages. I think the cricket's starting, so that'll keep me busy since I'm not going to be in the garden all day. Happy gardening. Get out there. Do your bit for the local birds, the local animals. Plant a native plant. See you next Saturday, 9:30 a.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Time. Ciao.